Can I start off with this because we're I think we're all awaiting the outcome of the Scott Boras clients. The two pitchers, Snell and Montgomery, Bellinger. I think Matt Chapman's one, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
So that's four big names out there, the most prominent names on the market. Tell us what you think Boras is up to. He's obviously wanting to get the best deals for his client, and he's excellent at that. But this is one of those things that's dragging along. So just give us a read on the situation, please.
Yeah, well, he's been known to slow play the market as it is. In his history, it was kind of used to be a thing where you'd have I guess you'd say the pre-New Year's free agency, and then you'd have the post-New Year's Scott Boras free agency, right? You'd have the guys who would go down in January, and that's now bleeding into February. It's been a very strangely paced off season for a variety of reasons. I mean, you did have some very big moves, but those were with very specific players and very specific teams involved. I mean, there were only so many teams that could even consider the Shohei Ohtani contract, for instance, or the Juan Soto trade, and you've had, and Soto is one of those who you've had some big needs addressed via trade with Soto, Corbin Burns moving. You had a number of teams hung up with their regional television situation, kind of in limbo, and that's finally reached some resolution here, at least for this year. So all these things have kind of been in the air, and but also just comes down to price tags, and we know Scott Boras puts a high price on his players, and there's a lot of nits to pick when it comes to the guys you just mentioned. Cody Bellinger came off a fantastic season with the Cubs, but was non-tendered a year earlier for a reason, by the Dodgers, who are, they have money to spend and are pretty good at evaluating talent. So it says a lot that they would non-tender him at that point. Matt Chapman, his bat has not had the life in it that the Blue Jays hoped. And, as great of a defender as he is at third base, what is that value in the open market? Blake Snell, 2 Cy Youngs in a otherwise, inconsistent career, not the traditional Cy Young winner at that, in terms of the workload. So very interesting free agent cases kind of all at once, and made all the more interesting by the timing now where, camps are opening up. And I'm sure in the case of, like Blake Snell, I mean, you kind of assume that some team, perhaps a really good team with a lot of money to spend, will have a guy or guys go down in spring training camp, and desperation kind of sets in at that point, and maybe that's what they're seeking to capitalize on.
Anthony Castrovince from MLB.com and MLB Network, who does a wonderful job, and again, follow him on X or Twitter, whatever you call it, at Castrovince, his last name. You look at the MLB, you look at the NL Central. I'm sorry, Anthony. The NL Central, of course, all the projection systems have weighed in how they see it. The Cardinals are pretty much projected to be at the top, but it's by a slim margin for the most part. And we all know that the NL Central is kind of going to be a free-for-all, and it might depend on whether the Cubs get Bellinger or one of these other guys. But how do you see the NL Central right now? And we all know it's subject to change based on additional roster moves, but how do you see it?
The Cardinals did something they had to do, obviously, in improving their pitching staff. Now, I do have my concerns with the way they went about it. And, it's an aging staff, and we have plenty of history, including recent history with the, last year's Mets in terms of what you can reasonably expect from a group with some age to it. You can expect guys to miss time is what you can expect. So, is that and the defensive element, where they're going to need excellent defense behind those guys, I think, because there's not a lot of, overpowering stuff there. So that's a concern of mine. I really, the Reds off season wasn't necessarily the way I expected them to go about it, but you look up and they look pretty good. They had a really nice push last season, ahead of schedule, most would say. They're deeper in the lineup now with Candelario, and they've added what figures to be meaningful innings to their pitching staff. Frankie Montas is a wild card there, but this guy was a really celebrated trade target not too long ago for a reason. The Yankees went out and got him for a reason at that point. He hasn't been healthy since. But, so I don't know. I kind of like the Reds overall, I think, as of today. But I think the Cubs could look a lot different in the next few weeks. They probably have the best opportunity in terms of resources. I mean, their offseason hasn't really happened for the most part. They got Imanaga comes over from Japan and Hector Neris into their bullpen, but it just feels like there's more to happen there, and whether it's bringing back Bellinger or bringing back Bellinger, plus, maybe they could do more beyond that. Who knows? But it seems to me they have the most upside in terms of what they could do externally.
Yeah, I'm just assuming there's going to be at least one big move. I still think the Cubs will be I'm projecting ahead as far as anticipating a roster maneuver that of some significance. I still think they shape up as the team to beat, but I could be wrong. I think it is pretty wide open. I want to ask you this about the Cardinals. Our friend Anthony Castrovince from MLB.com and the MLB Network. Nolan Arenado had the worst season of his career last year, and he's 33. Paul Goldschmidt is a little misleading. Yeah, his numbers were down, but they were good, but they were down from the MVP season. But, we live in the StatCast world. If you go to StatCast, like all his underlying stuff was really impressive. So he wasn't pulling the ball as much, and a lot of his numbers went down, the standard numbers, but I still think he hit the ball really well. So I'm not ready to kind of just chalk him as being in a steep decline because of age. And I'm sorry for the long-winded question, but I wanted to give you the background. What do you think the expectation should be for Arenado and Goldschmidt going into 2024? How do you see them?
I still see them as maybe not like, there's different categories, even within elite probably, right? Like there's elite, like MVP caliber, and I'm generally going to lean towards younger players in that particular category. Like I expect Ronald Acuna Jr. to have an MVP type season. I expect Juan Soto to have an MVP type season. I wouldn't go that far with players, as you get in their 30s, and what could happen. You get banged up out there. Arenado playing, Gold Glove caliber defense all these years. It's a toll on you over time. But I still see those guys as, 4-win players. If we're talking about wins above replacement, which is a really good season, not an MVP caliber season, but really strong cornerstones. I don't see why they're not capable of that. You're absolutely right about the underlying metrics on Goldschmidt, and to a lesser degree, well, certainly a lesser degree Arenado. He had a rough offensive season, but that's still a guy who, he's not going to strike out. He's going to give you excellent defense at a premier position. So, the floor there is pretty high, even at age 32. It's just a matter of, okay, can he get back the barrel on the ball the way he has in the past? And I don't see why not. I don't think this guy's going to fall off a cliff. I don't see a reason for that. I think he just had a not great season. That happens. But even Nolan Arenado in a not great offensive season has a high defensive floor. So that's the way I see it. Maybe I'm overly optimistic, but like if I'm talking about the Cardinals, like I'm less. Those are names you gravitate towards, of course, but I'm more curious just about the complexion elsewhere in the lineup. If we're talking about the lineup, I'm curious about Jordan Walker, taking the next steps. They moved Tyler O'Neill. You got Lars Nootbaar in a prominent spot. Nolan Gorman. These are the guys I'm more like. It's not even concerned. It's just these are guys I have more questions about or am more curious about. What is the ceiling for them, as opposed to Arenado and Goldschmidt, who I think are just high floor, high caliber players.
Yeah, and I think you got it. I think you're right on. The Cardinals have a young veteran nucleus of players that's better than they've had in a long time. And these are all homegrown guys too. Yeah, all of them are good in their own way. Like, it's not a question of whether they're any good. They're good. But you nailed the right word is ceiling. I think we're all waiting to see what the ceiling is because there's an anticipation, maybe even an expectation. They're not close to reaching their ceiling. But we could all be, perhaps overestimating that. But you look at Donovan and the way he gets on base and the way he works pitchers, and he's improved. His improving power. I mean, Gorman made a big jump last year, but he's got this recurring back issue. Walker's defense will be much better. Nootbaar's got to stay healthy, but he's been too inconsistent. And I don't mean to go down the whole roster, but there's a lot there that's, pretty exciting. But again, they got to stay on the field, and they've got to improve, and they got to come closer to moving up towards whatever that ceiling is. So I think their offense is going to be fine. I mean, Contreras is a terrific hitter. I think it's going to be fine, but maybe better than fine. But you're right. The pitching is still the big question.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I thought their lineup last year, it was disappointing. The overall, I thought that was maybe an all-world lineup, like one of the best lineups in MLB. It didn't turn out that way, but I do think you have growing pains with young guys. But I'm just generally not worried about the offensive performance. I think it'll be perfectly acceptable, to win the NL Central. My concerns are more pointed. Like I said, the age in that starting staff. And how does that hold together? Because it was a clear need going in the winter, and give them credit for addressing it early and aggressively. But the way they did it, left me kind of scratching my head because, I thought the idea here was to start overpowering some people, and that's not going to happen with this group. And by the way, Johnny Gray is 34, Miles Miklasz is 35. So Lance Lynn, he's pretty up there. So. That's my bigger concern is just does that group hold together?
Yeah, and it's legitimate, and I think they've done a better job of cultivating some depth behind that rotation. But it would be false to say that the next 3 or 4 guys in line are proven commodities. I mean, I think they all, like Zach Thompson's got a lot of potential, and he's actually been pretty impressive all in all. But yeah. They haven't had any depth behind their rotation, which was a disaster last year. I think they have taken some steps to improve that, so we'll see. Anthony, I always appreciate your time, man. Thank you very much, and look forward to reading you all season as usual.
Absolutely,
Thanks.
Bernie. Always enjoy the conversations, and it would be fun to get things going here very soon.
Okay, and what's you going on a spring training tour? If so, where are you starting out?
Oh, yeah. So I'm actually very heavy Arizona because I have a couple projects going on that relate to Arizona. So I'll be out there later this week and for the better part of the next month. So get me out of Cleveland and get me in the Cactus League. I'm all for it.
And I know it's work. And I know there'll be times where you're, dragging the laptop around and, you're getting tired of it for a few minutes. But spring training can also be a lot of fun. It's fun work. So have a good time. Because you love baseball. Yeah, you love baseball. So I know you'll have fun, even though there's a lot of work. So thank you again.
Thank you, Bernie. We'll see you.
See you. That's our friend Anthony Castrovince from MLB.com. One thing, we'll take a break here in a minute because we got Andy Strickland coming up talking Blues hockey at the bottom of the hour. By the way, we are off the air. This show is off the air at a little bit before 5 o'clock because we have Illinois basketball, the Fighting Illini home tonight against Michigan. And hoping a rebound after losing at Michigan State on Saturday. And I watched that game because I've been watching them a lot. But we will have the pregame show at 5 o'clock, and then the tip-off comes an hour later. So we'll be scooting out of here a little more than a half an hour from now. We'll be back tomorrow with a full show. Jim, real quick, I was one thing about. And I don't have a lot of time here, so this is I don't know that's going to be a fully developed segment, if you will. But the Cardinals do have, with some of these guys that, with Chaim Bloom's help, because he's got connection to all these, some of these guys that they're bringing to camp, they've put on the 40-man roster, the guys that they picked up over the offseason. It was like 7 different relievers.
Right.
You look at them, and other than Middleton and other than Kittredge, there's not like this extensive track record. I'm well aware of that. But I do think people overlook, people in our business, and I've done this, you sort of overlook about there's so many different ways to construct a bullpen. And it's always changing. It's never the same. And it's not necessarily about big ticket, high price guys. A lot of it is supply. A lot of it is, all right, raw, pure, natural talent. We can harness it, and we think we'll have some good relievers. And I think the Cardinals do have guys like that. I'm not being a homer. I think they absolutely have guys like that with that kind of potential. So I look at the bullpen, and I'm thinking, we got to look at it differently. We got to look at it through a different kind of prism, where it's not just you're looking for the veterans. You're looking for all these guys with these big-time track records. It's really not that way anymore, or at least not nearly as close to being that way anymore. And I give you an example, and it's an example that comes from a hell of a team that actually won the NL pennant in 2013. Trevor Rosenthal, 23 years old. Seth Maness, 24 years old. Kevin Segras, 23 years old. Joe Kelly, 25 years old. Carlos Martinez, who was big in the bullpen, 21 years old. There were some other guys who were on the younger side, and they were okay, but I'd be overstating it if I tried to portray them as big-time contributors. But my point is, the Cardinals have added a lot of guys that have some of the traits of the players that or the relievers that I just discussed. And these guys weren't big names. I think the year before, I think in 2012, Rosenthal kind of made his way to the majors, and there was a little advance notice that he was striking guys out. I think, people knew the Carlos Martinez buzz. Mm-hmm. I don't think many people ever heard of Kevin Segras. Joe Kelly, only because they brought him up at a really young age to be a starting pitcher in 2012. But no one was sure how he would pitch in a relief role. And he was, he did, start some games, but he also pitched in relief. He did both. And Lance Lynn was a starting pitcher, but he was 26 at that point in time. So I'm sort of just going around in circles here, and I apologize. My point is, the Cardinals have won, and they have succeeded with a young cast of so-called unproven relievers at the big league level. It's not all that unusual. It's not unusual at all. In fact, I would argue that the Cardinals have made a mistake because they ceased to develop these young homegrown relievers and the supply of them that they could rely on, and instead they were trying to buy a bullpen, and frankly, it was a mess. And that's why I kind of chuckle a little bit, all the people that want to they're judging the bullpen based on the money they've spent on the bullpen. Listen, man, I know 2013 is in the rearview mirror, but 2013 is not all that long ago. It's not like I'm talking about, those 1943 Cardinals. So what is this hang up on spending on relievers? I really don't understand that. If you got young, raw talent that you can harness, give them the ball in the bullpen and let them go. LaRusse and Duncan firmly believe you got guys with great stuff down in the minor leagues that you really think can be special, but you think you can help them by putting them in the bullpen, learn how to pitch and learn how to use stuff and just learn how to handle it. That's the best way to get a guy ready to become a starter. Adam Wainwright, for example?
Oh, yes.
Or when Matt Morris returned from Tommy John surgery, spent a year in relief. It was great. Got his bearings straight, got recalibrated. Yeah, I don't need the big names. I really, truly like the depth that they have put together. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's going to be a smashing success. I'm not making that prediction. I'm just saying, don't rule it out. Don't dismiss it before we see what transpires, because there's some real potential there, number one. And number two, the 2013 Cardinals had one of the best ERAs in the league and saved a lot of games and were great at protecting leads late in games. And they won 97 games in the National League pennant and got to the sixth game of the World Series with largely a no-name cast of young relievers. What about 2006?
Oh, yeah.
Tyler Johnson, Josh Kinney, they were huge. Wainwright we knew about because he was already in their bullpen. Those guys were huge in that postseason run. They weren't anybody, but they did have talent and they did have potential. So people just get locked into this thing and they never come out of it. They just can't break away from opinions that for some reason they've put in granite. Just can't open their minds to see other possibilities. I try to keep my mind open. I fail sometimes, but that's what I try to do, because I've seen too much through the years to know. Don't assume anything. Especially with the bullpen, there are so many ways to build an effective bullpen.